Hello and welcome to episode 120. I'm your host, David J. Murphy. Welcome to Around the Lens, I should say, the internet's only live weekly visual journalism roundtable streaming podcast. We're not really at a roundtable. It's not really a panel today. It's just me and David. Returning panelist David H. Wells. I'm Ronless and I'm Zachless tonight. You are it for me. So please, for our audience who may not know who you are, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Nice seeing you again, and glad to be back again. It's great to see how you continually are building around the lens, both in terms of the people you get to speak and also the promotion and just getting it out there.
Indeed.
I am a magazine photographer turning into a video maker, which is sort of our topic for tonight. I spent about 5 years working in the newspaper world, about 20 years working in the magazine world. In the last 5 years, I've been doing short videos, and now I'm transitioning into longer projects.
Nice. All right. Great. Well, I think you're the perfect guest for tonight's show because we got a lot of video to talk about tonight. We're going to talk about transitioning to video. We're going to talk about video cameras, specifically the Blackmagic new camera that they just pushed out or announced, I should say. GoPro, another video camera maker, and they might be sold to a Chinese company. And, of course, not something video related, our World Press Photo of the Year. And at the end of the show tonight, we're going to have our mailbag segment. So our first ever legitimate mailbag segment, we have an email directed at the show for us to talk about on the show. So we're going to save that for the very end. So that'll be a fun thing to do. But let's get on and get started with the show. David, you're a noted videographer, I think, and you've been doing video for a while now. Talk to us about how you transitioned from photo to video. What was that like for you?
Well, most of my transitions from newspapers to magazine to now to video have been much more accidental than intentional. And I say that because only with video in the last few years have I started to look at it and plan it more analytically. But my transition to magazine work was just because in the day when there were fewer photographers than there were jobs, and so, it was a good market for photographers. The natural
Thank goodness
hierarchy
that's not the case anymore.
No, it's certainly not, unfortunately. But the hierarchy, was small newspaper, medium newspaper, and then long-term goal was typically magazine work. And I did that transition, and then digital came along. Of course, we know that line of work was largely vaporized. But the upside of the digital, which of course completely changed the publication market, was it cut the barriers to entry for digital down to nothing. And I did some video, apologies. It cut the barriers to entry to video to nothing. I did a little video in college, but it was black and white only, and it was tape that you actually had to cut pieces of tape together. And of course, now it's so incredibly easy, and it's expanded the tool set that I just was more and more intrigued by it. And I was trying to figure out if it would be a way to add to my skill set about 5 years ago. And then, of course, many people started talking about that's exactly where it was going, and MediaStorm came along, and a number of other production companies turned out to be prescient, and that's exactly where it was gone. So I was a little behind the curve on digital. It's not that I was so ahead of the curve on video, but I wasn't as far behind on video as I was on digital. And then the other thing was that I have an educational blog called The Wells Point, which we've actually talked about before, and doing the podcasts on that, both in the studio, screen grab based podcasts and podcasts in the field, were opportunities to force myself to learn how to do video. Because like you, I'm guessing, like most people who are watching this, we're visual learners, and the way we learn is by doing it. I don't really take classes well, but I make a lot of videos and make a lot of mistakes, and then eventually the cream rises to the top.
Exactly. You can't do this without making mistakes, and that's how you learn. Right. So, there's nothing against that, nothing wrong with that. What do you think has been, the success of your transition? Do you think it's viable for all, or is it something that only certain people should do, or do you think anybody can do it?
I don't think anybody can do it, because what's happened in the last maybe year and a half is that, maybe even less, I've started bidding and proposing larger projects, and that's one of the things I kind of want to touch on tonight, because that transition that I did from newspapers where somebody's paying you a salary to freelance, I had to really get good at pitching myself, proposing projects, dreaming up things, and then of course having the tool set to execute them. And I've been doing that exact same thing in video in the last 2 years. And in the last year or so, I've really started succeeding at being both comfortable myself and convincing clients that I should be somebody to bid on their projects. And so all the skills that I needed as a self-employed magazine photographer are just as relevant for video making. So no, I would not say anybody can do it. But if you have the skills in terms of marketing, self-promotion, a strong backbone of confidence, and a really strong work ethic, yes, possibly.
What would you say somebody, I mean, obviously you're dealing with this, you've been doing this business for a while, but if somebody wanted to get into video now, is it just work ethic, or is there a sort of a path that you would recommend? Or would you say, go college route, go freelance route, I mean, you see it, all the time on these YouTubers all the time, trying to like make it as a YouTuber, just make your own stuff and put it out there. What would you kind of recommend to somebody who is, starting out or just wants to focus on, the video aspect of visual journalism?
I think the biggest thing is to really define your market. And by that, I mean there are many, many successful video producers or filmmakers out there who work with large production crews. And
Right.
That's one market. That's not the market I'm in. I'm in the one-man band, one-person band market. That's a choice that I've made explicitly. But there are many successful magazine photographers turned filmmakers who are doing that with, small crews, 5 to 10 people, or giant production sets where you've got 40 or 50 people. That is a very small pyramid to get to the top of that. And so it's definitely a battle to do that. The reason that I like working as a one-man band is, A, my market, price-wise, being in Providence, Rhode Island, which is not New York or Boston or LA, tends to support a lower price point. I have much more control over my project, but I do clearly see projects that come in front of me that are beyond my skill set. So if I was starting over, I think what I'm saying to somebody is they should really first define that. Because some people work really well in a collaborative environment. Some people work really well in a solo environment. The YouTubers doing the travel stuff, that's also, if you look at it really carefully, another one of these pyramids of only a few people can do it. So
Right.
to look at it really, really clearly and analytically. And again, the business skills are as much or probably more important than the technical skills.
Is it that only a few people can do it, or that only a few people succeed at it? Because, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, you can be a YouTuber. Anybody can be a YouTuber. But
Right.
to actually make a living doing it, that is extremely hard. And that is one of those things like sports or movie stardom or any of these things where a fraction of a percent actually make a living doing this stuff.
That
Out of
is
the whole.
correct. Right. And so sure, certainly anybody can do it. And then the other question is, are you in a large market? Are you in a small market? Are you in a niche market? Are you doing something that hundreds of other people can do? Then if you are, you're probably going to have to be really, really exceptional. If you're doing something that not that many other people can do, or you're in a smaller market, you're more likely to survive and thrive. And so that function also of what the market that you're in is the next question. A lot of people I know, for example, that I follow and watch, there's a whole market, of course, for travel photography and action outdoor sports,
Right.
Skateboarders and stuff like that, which I can't do both because of my age, for lack of a better term, and my physical skill set.
Age is only a number, David. Age is only a number. Come on.
Until I fall off a skateboard, where I know people who who are
That
very
is a trip to an emergency room.
Right. So those are outside of my range, and the people who can do that puts them at advantage over me, for example. So it's just as competitive, if not more competitive, than magazine photography was. The thing is that there are now, especially in the last 3 or 4 years, the low to middle end clients are seeing the need for videos for their corporations, for their nonprofits, for their groups, for their institutions. And so ironically, there is a market there if you can figure out what it is.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think, there's definitely a market for everything. But, we had Ethan. Now, you work exclusively freelance, right? You're a straight freelancer?
Straight freelancer, right.
So, we had a guest on a few weeks ago, Ethan Rocky. He did the freelance video route, and he decided to go full-time because he just it wasn't doing it for him, and he wanted that security and safety that comes with working at a full-time job at a company. What kind of drives you to continue doing the freelance thing versus taking the full-time position? Are there just they aren't available, or you prefer the freelance lifestyle? And why do you prefer either or?
Well, if I was younger, I would definitely do some of some of the full-time jobs that I see, because, for example, my editing skill in Final Cut Pro, which is getting pretty good, Final Cut Pro X, is all self-taught. And if I was 40 and somebody would say, I'll give you a full-time job for a couple of years, and along the way, I'd, of course, master Final Cut Pro and possibly maybe Premiere along the way as well, that would be something to do. At this point in my life, I am not going to go back and learn Premiere. I've learned Final Cut well enough to do my projects on my own. So it's partly a function of autonomy. It's partly a function of my age. I have other ways that I make a living. I still get a decent amount of income, though it's shrinking from stock. And I also teach a decent amount of workshops for adult learners, photography, and now actually video workshops. I'm starting to teach video workshops. And so for me, the aggregate balance of all of those multiple revenue streams make it better for my particular situation to stay independent rather than have to give up the workshops and the other stuff to take a full-time job.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else you'd like to add before we moved on?
Well, the big thing about that would be that if I was younger, I think I would do it differently. I think I would take some of those jobs, full-time in different kinds of things, full-time shooting jobs, full-time editing jobs.
If you didn't have the sort of, passive income that you currently have, right?
Right. I mean, the best example of this, and I was actually talking to a guy who may be working with me next year after he graduates. I learned how to do a slightly long story, but I think it's relevant. I learned how to do color slides in the 80s one summer because I saw that color slides were going to become a big business by working at a summer camp where I made a slideshow of the week's activity every week for 12 weeks. So I learned how to expose color slides, which at one point in time was a real discipline on somebody else's dime. What popped into my email box about a week ago is somebody was looking for somebody to do videos at a summer camp for 12 weeks to do exactly the same thing, but to produce one video a week. And were I 25 or 30, I probably would go and do that because that discipline of doing a video a week under deadline, editing wise and light and interviews and sound, that would be where somebody, much younger than I, would learn how to do all the stuff that you have to do that we learned, in photojournalism at newspapers and along the way. And I think it gets lost in the current economy. There aren't as many places to learn and get feedback in the way that there used to be because there's so many fewer outlets, which I know is an ongoing theme around the lens.
Indeed. You made an interesting mention about stocks there. You said you make money from your stocks. Are you selling stocks or are you getting dividends from stocks? Just curious. I'm a stock owner myself. This isn't investment chat, but, I'm just curious.
I might have been unclear. I was talking about stock photography.
Oh, okay. Stock photography. Yeah. Yes. Thank you.
No, I don't. I mean, I have minimal amount of stuff invested, but I got into stock very early in the late 80s and early 90s. And simply by having gotten in earlier than most people, what has just funneled downward for most people is still funneling down for me, but it's not quite as painful as I think as it is for other people. So that's what I meant. No, I don't. No. Sorry,
so,
can't get anything about you.
quick on the stock photography. Are you using like a stock website, or was it even prior to stock websites, like some sort of stock agency?
Yeah, I mean, I have stuff with both Getty and Corbis and a number of other agencies back from the Stone Age when agencies approached photographers and picked up their archives and made them decent splits. I mean, it's really, I'm a something of a dinosaur in the stock age. I looked at a lot of the contemporary sites, and the for me, the labor to shoot and then archive and keyword and do this and that against the return is just not there. We're having stuff already in the system that has been taken in by these agencies, and they did the bulk of that work 15, 20 years ago.
Right.
Continues to be of some value. So it's definitely an aberration because of I know age is only a number and all that, but in that case, it's actually a good number.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, that's good. I'm glad you got in there early enough, for sure. That's a great thing for you. I mean, I would say someone trying to get into stock now would probably have to go to like one of the iStock Photo or these agencies that sell your photos for pennies on the dollar, and all like royalty free, trying to make as many sales as possible. Because that's why all I've heard about the stock business, like you said, it's funneling downward, it's going away because there's so much, imagery out there, and it's all being sold for next to nothing. So glad you're still making some money off of it.
And you're also competing with people who are contributing work from overseas where a dollar goes a whole lot further than it does here, which is a whole nother discussion.
Yeah.
So, yes.
Indeed. Yeah. All right, well, let's go ahead and move on to our next topic. Keep the video train going and talk about a video camera, specifically the Blackmagic Design Pocket Cinema Camera 4K. This is the sequel to their last Pocket Cinema camera, which shot only 1080p, a measly 1080p, if I'll say that. So now we've got the 4K variant here. What's neat about this camera is that it has a micro four thirds sensor. So it's actually using a similar sensor, or the same sensor as the Panasonic GH5. So if you were, considering perhaps getting a GH5 or a GH5S, you might want to consider this camera, because you're getting basically the same thing. I think some interesting things here is it doesn't have a viewfinder. It uses solely a 5-inch touchscreen. So I thought that's an interesting design choice because, although I like my viewfinder on my GH5, I do also like the screen. But I like the viewfinder because when it's too bright out, I can look through the viewfinder and I can still see what I'm shooting. Plus, as a old school DSLR shooter and camera shooter, I like looking through the viewfinder, even though it's just a screen nowadays on my Micro Four Thirds camera. So it shoots again, true raw 4K, 60 frames per second. So again, that's pretty impressive on its own, and it just seems like a very decent camera. It can shoot 120 frames per second slow motion in HD. It's got some CFast. It's got SD card. It's got, I think what's pretty neat is a mini XLR port. So if you're looking to do, legitimate real world audio recording, you've got that capability there, in addition to HDMI and USB-C, and probably the regular headphone and microphone ports. So it's a pretty strong contender for a good camera. There's some things I don't like about it, but I'm gonna throw it over to you, David, first to kind of see what you think about this camera. Is this something that intrigues you? Would you be considering picking up one of these cameras for the low price of $1,300 if you want to shoot 4K?
It's the first new camera I think in a long time I've looked at. Seriously, I look at pretty much everything that comes out, and to be brutally honest, I say that won't work because of X or Y. Price point being one. Most of the Blackmagics and the Reds and things like that are simply too big for the kind of work I do. For example, I'm using right now Olympus mirrorless Micro Four Thirds, the OMD EM1 Mark II. Which actually does shoot 4K, and the reason I went to that is besides the 4K is it has audio in and audio out. So for my purposes, it's been great. It is much smaller than, say, a 5D or anything like that. It has incredible internal stabilization. So I use a monopod pretty often, but I don't use a big, fixed place tripod, so I can work pretty fluidly. So most of the stuff that comes across the internet in terms of the next camera, I look at and say, too big, too much money. This is the first one where I actually looked at because also it has a hand grip, which if you're working the way that I work is a really big thing. I actually am really intrigued by that big screen because I mostly shoot with a folding screen on my Olympus cameras, so I'm used to that screen. Mm-hmm. I'm very excited about the lens mount because obviously I can keep all my lenses. I am curious if it has the same kind of stabilization that I'm used to in the Olympuses. I couldn't find anything about that. Did you happen to find anything about that?
Yeah, so this kind of goes to one of the things I don't like about the camera. There is no in-body stabilization. It only has like electronic stabilization, so that means that you're going to be having to crop in on the image a little bit if you want to get any sort of like in-camera stabilization. So I think that's one of the areas where they probably had to cut out to save money. So I also don't like the fact that I can't move the screen. I've gotten really used to, here on my GH5, plug for the GH5. I mean, I just love this pop-out screen. I use this. This is indispensable for getting up and down shots. To have to go back to a fixed screen That'd be tough. That'd be tough, and not being able to see myself when I want to do my little, my selfie shots and stuff like that. I think that's tough. I mean,
That's very important.
yeah, I know they put
Yeah.
they put a record button right here, so you can kind of record yourself, which I like that. But I really just dislike the fact that I can't move the screen at all. I can't even tilt it up and down. At a bare minimum, I would want something like that. That would really be a step back for me. It's something I would consider. But is it something to consider over the price difference? So again, if you're comparing this to a GH5, you're talking about 1,300 versus 2,000. So in addition, is it worth an extra $700 for in-body image stabilization? You're still getting image stabilization in the lenses. If there's any lens stabilization, I assume that still works, and the electronic stabilization. So it's not going to be as buttery smooth. But I think most people buying this camera are planning to put it inside of a rig, or handhold it. But I think I can see them putting like one of those DJI Ronin S type rigs, the handheld rigs, that you can just kind of do all the smooth tracking. So I don't know if it's really that big a deal. I mean, if you look at Panasonic, they released the GH5S, and there's no in-body image stabilization in that. So I mean, it seems like the more professional videographers don't want the in-body image stabilization, or at least that's not the market they're aiming for. And this market, for this camera seems to be the extremely high-level professional, who also wants something small and compact and lightweight and easy to move around. So, there's no in-body image stabilization. So if that's a deal breaker for you, like it is for me, then that's something that I would consider definitely having a hard time. But again, the price is really good. So, and you get a free copy of their Blackmagic Studio, which is $300, or you can get Blackmagic 15. Not Blackmagic. Resolve. Resolve.
DaVinci Resolve.
Right. The Resolve Studio, the full price one is $300. So, if you consider the fact that they're giving you a key for that program in with the camera, that helps ease the cost a little bit. It's like giving you a free copy of Premiere if you bought any other camera. Of course, it doesn't last forever. You got to pay for it continuously. Which, by the way, I've moved away from all Adobe products. I've been Adobe free for probably a good 6 months now. So I'm enjoying the extra money in my bank account for sure. And it really hasn't been that big a deal. I've been able to transition without too many issues. But
so what are you using? I mean, I know we're going a little off, but not really. What are you using for software? Final Cut Pro and
no, I'm using Resolve for video editing. Right. I'm using GIMP for photo editing. I'm also using Darktable as a Lightroom alternative.
Okay.
What else? And that's pretty much it for everything I need for the right now. I mean, if I ever need to do any more like high level graphic stuff, I'll try and do it in GIMP. Or I'm sure there's some other program out there. I mean, there's a lot of great programs on phones and tablets that have a lot
amazing
of
stuff
powerful,
tablets, yeah.
They're very cheap or free. So there's pretty much an alternative to everything, and I haven't had to pay really a dime for any of my alternative programs. Resolve is free for the most part, unless you want to get access to some additional features, which I don't really need. And honestly, I prefer the editing platform higher than Premiere, and I've never messed with Final Cut Pro myself, so I can't talk to that. Are you Final Cut or are you Premiere?
No, I'm Final Cut Pro X. I taught myself Final Cut 7, and then X came along, and I know a lot of people were really, really opposed to what they did because they reconfigured it so radically. But if you didn't know Premiere, if you didn't know Avid, you were coming at it as a complete outsider like me. Right. I actually really think Final Cut X is amazing because as somebody who doesn't have that kind of baggage, it's given me incredible power to do all sorts of things that I literally didn't know were possible. And I'm still learning, by the way. I'm nowhere near there.
Oh,
but, yeah.
Well, like the new version of Resolve 15, that has like some really, really powerful new features attached to it that come with the main program that can do all kinds of crazy effects. That's like a whole other thing. Like you can learn in and of its own. That's like having After Effects built in to the video editing. You're not having to deal with like 6 different programs and bouncing between them. I mean, you can do so much in just the one program. And honestly, the transition wasn't that hard. I'm like you. I grew up with Premiere, and I look at other video editing programs like Avid and Final Cut, and I'm like, I just can't do this. But I watched some tutorials and some videos, and about an hour or two, got kind of studying the program, and I was into it. I was totally down, and I can totally see their philosophy with the way they designed the program, and a lot of the shortcuts still work the same. So, if you're looking for an alternative Premiere, if you're tired of paying for Adobe stuff, definitely look into Resolve.
One of the interesting things about Resolve and Final Cut Pro, I don't know if you know, but about 5 months ago, they did a pretty substantial upgrade to Final Cut Pro X, and they did not have color grading in it, and they built color grading in, and I've assumed that was in response to Resolve being out there and being essentially free.
Yeah.
Because I actually was an example of somebody who's thinking, all right, am I going to have to learn Resolve to learn color grading? And now Final Cut Pro X has it, so I probably am not going to migrate over there because it's all built in. But it was an interesting example of market forces, Blackmagic responding to the push that Apple responding to the push from DaVinci Resolve.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think Blackmagic is going to be a force to be reckoned with in this space. Considering the quality of their software, and because it's free, I mean the barrier to entry is non-existent. So you're going to have a lot of new, young, up and coming videographers, YouTubers, and whatever learning the craft on DaVinci and becoming used to it. And it's if you really want to buy it, it's only $300. So you're talking about a one-time payment of $300, not a monthly payment of like $50 or whatever. Adobe wants to charge. So, if I really needed some extra features, I could pay for it, and it wouldn't be that big a deal to me because it's such a robust platform on its own. I'm able to do 99% of anything I want to do on the free platform. So, I think that's going to be definitely something competitors should look out at, and see how they're going to manage and compete with that. But yeah, I like it. I highly recommend it. But do whatever works for you, whatever helps you make the video easier. I'm definitely very intrigued by this camera. I love the fact that it uses a micro four thirds mount because it works with all my Panasonic lenses because it's micro four thirds. I love the fact that there's a standard that isn't tied to Nikon or Sony. That's kind of another thing that's kind of drew me to the micro four thirds side is that if I decide to switch out camera manufacturers, as long as it's within the micro four thirds ecosystem, I can swap my lens. I don't have to buy a completely new set of lenses like I did when I moved from Canon to the GH5. So I'm glad they chose the 4/3 setting. And like I said, I could probably get used to the no viewfinder. I'm sure they'll put an attachment on there where if you really want a viewfinder, like I recently got the Nikon 1, and that doesn't have a built-in viewfinder. You actually have to buy an attachment, which you stick in where the light shoe or the hot shoe goes, and that's how you get your viewfinder. So it is what it is. I could deal with both of them. I could deal with anything. I mean, again, if I did not have the GH5, if I was in the market for either this camera or the GH5, I would be hard pressed to turn this camera down. It's a very compelling package, and I think even if without the in-body stabilization, I think you have a lot of stabilization options in editing, and I think stabilization of the lens and the stabilization. I think it all would work out in the end. And as long as you're shooting tripod, shooting on some kind of stabilizer, I think you're okay. But do you think you'd get this for your work, David? You said you're seriously considering it.
I don't know about seriously considering. I'm certainly going to follow it. It's in the category of look at again and see in a few months or a year, especially if there is a good response to it, and if they come back with either a folding screen or maybe a $500 higher version with the internal stabilization, or possibly both. I don't think that they iterate bodies as fast as say Panasonic or Olympus does. So I don't really know. But it's the first one that I've looked at and didn't just say, no, that's not really going to work for me. So I'll probably pay attention to it. I'm also not an early adapter. I tend to watch and let other people buy the first, year's worth of camera bodies and watch them suffer through all the mistakes.
Right.
Especially with the software related issues in particular.
Yeah, I would say the same thing, but this isn't their first cinema camera, their pocket cinema camera.
True.
They did have the other one. So, but it doesn't hurt to wait. The Pocket Cinema camera, the first one is selling for $1,000. I do not know when that came out, but there's nothing hurt waiting and wait for some used ones to come out and save some money.
That's the other option
as well.
Right.
There's no.
Right.
What are you shooting with now?
The OMD EM1 Mark II, so it's also micro four thirds,
Okay. Is
and
that
it does have
4K?
4K. It doesn't
Okay.
have the highest shutter frame rate's 30 frames a second, so that's one of the
Garbage.
things
Complete
it does.
garbage.
That's one of the things that does intrigue me
Yeah.
about this other camera was getting more frame rate capabilities.
No, I love the camera. I love the fact that it shoots raw 4K. I think
Right.
that's one of the things where I think the GH5 lacks, but I'm not 100% sure because I kind of shoot, I don't shoot like fancy 4K. I shoot, kind of user friendly 4K. Because most of my stuff is, shoot to edit and upload, to YouTube pretty quick. So I'm not doing a ton of color grading on my work. So I don't
Mm.
think, I love the dynamic range. I love the
Yeah,
4K. I love
that's
the raw. I think that's pretty neat. But again, I'm not doing tons of production work where I need that kind of capability. I don't know if that's something, that draws you. Do you think the dynamic range would be something that would draw you in?
yeah. The dynamic range is the other thing that had me intrigued. So
Okay.
yeah. What
So,
I do now is I shoot. I don't. The Olympus cameras don't have a formal RAW, but what most people do is they have a special flat
right.
option in
Yes.
there, and then you turn the highlights down by 3, and you turn the highlights down by 3, shadows open by 3. It looks incredibly flat, but when you go to do post work, it looks great. So
Definitely.
that's what I've been doing with my 4K.
Yeah, there's something very similar on the GH5, but I just don't have the. I barely mess with my editing anyway, so I just don't have the
Yeah.
wherewithal to get into it. But maybe I will someday. Let's move on to our next topic. Talking about 4K, the GoPro can shoot 4K. It can
Right.
shoot 4K 60. Probably will shoot 4K 20 in the next iteration, if there is another iteration. They're not doing too hot as a company. They're being kind of outsold by these sort of cheaper
Right.
Chinese manufacturers. I mean, it's tough, because obviously, uh, GoPro is trying to make the GoPro camera into a premium product, right? I mean, it is a high
Mm.
quality product, but they're selling them for $400 to $500, and you got again these Chinese, I'll say, alternatives that are selling for like a fifth that or fourth that.
Right.
So it's tough to compete, and I think the difficulty is there. It's like I, like many people, bought a GoPro a few years ago. I don't need another GoPro. The GoPro I have shoots 4K 30. I don't need another GoPro. I barely use the GoPro I have. Most people have, I think, the machinations that they see the snowboarder, they see the kayaker going down the Alpine or going down the river, and they're like, oh man, I'm going to do that. And then they get it, and they maybe do a hiking trip, and that's about it. Maybe they bike around their
Right.
neighborhood, and nobody wants to see their footage, and they don't use it, and then it sits in a shelf. That's kind of how mine is. How about you?
Well, I don't have one, but I have an Olympus action camera similar to it. It's called the Tough Camera.
Okay,
And basically the exact same thing. I don't use it enough to justify buying a new one. And it
right.
was a really funny piece in the Times when the news came out actually about the Chinese buying it, because the core problem is that people buy them, as you said, once, and they don't buy them again. The
Right.
only people who buy them more than once are the film studios in LA, where they'll put 100 on an action scene
Yeah.
and destroy 50 of them, and they
Yeah.
need another one the next day. But most of us keep our cameras for a long, long time. So it's a fundamental problem that they've got, that they had before the wave of the lower cost Chinese cameras, and then you bring the lower cost Chinese cameras in. It seems like a doomed proposition.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, maybe the question is, are any people in the audience going to chime in with an email and say, no, I continually buy one every 2 or 3 years? Because I would be curious to know who does that. Because unless you're doing action sports, I don't do that enough to justify buying them that often. And I think that's pretty typical for most people.
Yeah. I mean, I bought the Hero 3, and then I bought the Hero 4 when I went to 4K. And then
Mm-hmm.
there just really hasn't been too much to intrigue me to upgrade from the 4K. Again, if I use them more often or use them regularly, I could see the thing. But I'm just a dad with 2 kids who has a pretty boring lifestyle, and I tried. I bought like a little gimbal thing for it, which was pretty neat. But I need a more exciting life. That's me.
You don't want to strap them on your kid's forehead and have them run around and shoot action videos
Play
from
hide and
their.
seek with them.
Yeah.
Maybe that's something I'll do. My 3-year-old is getting pretty smart, so he recently learned how to play the game of tag, so that was
Ah.
fun.
Yeah.
So he may do that. No, yeah, I mean, I gotta just find more creative ways to use them in my filmmaking. I think if I'm on a project, I found when I did a project for a documentary, and I set up the GoPro in a corner of a restaurant and set up for time lapse. And so it was doing time lapse while I was doing everything else I had to do. So I was essentially maximizing my time by using the GoPro to do another aspect. So that's where I see, that's where I found use in the GoPro product and having it sort of being a secondary. Or, if, for instance, I did photo reviews or, video reviews or whatever, I could use the GoPro, stick that under my hot shoe and shoot video with that while I'm taking photos. But again, I mean, I'm sure there are a bunch of uses for it. By even then, I still would not see myself upgrading to a 4K, the next one, because they're really expensive and because I can get pretty much what I need from the GoPro I have. I like the idea of 4K 60 or more stabilized 4K. I know that's stuff they've put in to their latest cameras, but at this point, I just can't justify it.
Yeah, same here. I mean, because also what you said, I do frequently on jobs use two and sometimes three cameras in different angles and stuff, running time lapse, for example.
Right.
But those are some of the point and shoots. Like I own a couple of high-end Olympus point and shoots that'll do time lapse, and my action camera will do time lapse, and those are running on many jobs. But buying another one just doesn't seem to be in the cards right now. I got to save my money for that other camera.
Yeah.
For the Blackmagic. So.
Yeah. Indeed. There you go.
Yeah.
So the company could sell for potentially $1 billion. Do you have any worry about an American company being sold to a Chinese company? Does that bother you at all, or is that just the way it is?
Well, I'm not. If it was part of a larger discussion about which companies we allow to have overseas ownership, I'd be interested in having that discussion. I'm not sure about this one company and so on. I am curious though about the Chinese from what I read, the company peaked in value. GoPro peaked in value a couple of years ago, at notably higher than that. But that's still a pretty large chunk of change. So the Chinese must see something in that, and I would be curious to know what it is they see in that, because maybe I don't know. That's the part that I'm more curious about. Is that's a large amount of money to part with for something unless you think you're going to get some kind of value out of it. And again, I know nothing about the business side of this. So
yeah, well, I think what they're paying for is the name, and
right.
I think what will happen is if they do buy them, is you're going to see some drastically reduced price GoPros. I think you'll still see some high end GoPros, but I think you're going to see a lot of different levels of GoPro, all the way down to $100 up to $500, and you're going to see higher quality at lower prices, matching kind of what the other companies in China have done, like the E4K or whatever they have here. So I think that's what you're going to see. You're going to see GoPro kind of, more seen as a budget brand, and able to compete more at that level. I doubt you'll see a GoPro, even at the higher end, topping perhaps more than $300. I just don't think people have the really justify it. Yeah. So again, like I say, you're going to see like $100 GoPros to $300 GoPros, and that's about it. So,
and sort of related, DJI is a Chinese company, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And the reason I'm saying is because they have done an extraordinary job of filling different niches in the drone market. So maybe this is sort of a similar kind of a thing.
Maybe they can kind of turn the GoPro around, but again, we'll see. I'm interested. Will I buy another GoPro? I don't know. If it's cheap enough, maybe.
Right.
If it's cheap enough and has the features I want, I think the 4K 60, being able to shoot that on the GH5, I am kind of addicted to that now. So, I kind of don't like 4K 30 anymore. If I can have that option for a little bit of extra speed, I'll take it. So, 4K 120 would be pretty nice, or 6K. That's always an option. So we'll see what they can do with the next generation of GoPros for sure.
Right.
All right. Our final topic this evening is not about video. It's about this. I don't know. It's called photos. It's one single frame. I don't know why anyone would want to watch one single frame of non-moving imagery, but some people do. There's a niche for these things called photos, and now they declared the photo of the year. Specifically the World Press Photo of the Year, and it's a man on fire.
Right.
So let me tell you a little bit about this photograph. It's you can go check it out on our link in their show notes. But Venezuelan photographer Ronald Schmidt. He was awarded the World Press Photo of the Year for 2018 of a Venezuelan man who was on fire during violent clashes with riot police. It was one of 6 finalists that were named back in February. And basically, 50% of readers voted for Schmidt's photo as the most deserving. It also won first place in the Spot News category. Basically, the photo is, it talks about, this protester and violent clashes with riot police. In the backstory of the photo is, President Maduro had announced plans to raise Venezuela's democratic national system, revise, I should say, by forming a constituent assembly to replace the opposition of the National Assembly, in effect, consolidating legislation. Okay, so a lot of technical political mumbo jumbo here, but essentially it was a really good photograph that won a great award and competed amongst some very, very strong and striking photographs to get this award. So throw it over to you, David. What do you think of this shot? You think it's worthy of its sort of accolade?
Well, I think it's a beautiful shot. My thoughts actually revolve around the larger climate, which is there was a nice piece in the New York Times Lens blog about another image that was made milliseconds before by a photographer standing next to the person who won. And the other image is, roughly as interesting informationally in terms of what you see, but the one that won definitely has more of a kind of a poetry to it. And reading the interview with the photographer, he wasn't really talking about poetry in the sense that it happened so fast, but one photographer clearly got a better sort of moment in terms of the gesture and almost the dance, if you can say such a thing, because it has a really interesting, almost ethereal quality to it, especially compared to the other one, which is more documentary. I was sort of curious about the World Press Photo using crowdsourcing of the voting. Has that been a point of much discussion, or is that just something that's the way things go these days?
I didn't know about it until I read this article, actually, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, I read a little bit about that, and I was thinking, I wonder what that means, because are they don't trust their experts anymore? They're trying to do it because of popularity. Maybe this is another show where you can get somebody who's more in the know about that, but that was something that struck me when I read that. I was trying to figure out, how do I feel about that? So let me ask you, how do you feel about the idea of crowdsourcing your voting of the contests?
I think that why should any one person be seen as able to discern the qualities of an image over anyone else? Who are the judges for the World Press Photo Competition, and why are their opinions and viewpoints any more relevant than mine as a regular viewer? Why can't I appreciate a viewing of an image? I mean, you have to understand where I think, it's pretty clear that a lot of the people who enter this contest and pay attention to this contest, have a degree of knowledge and appreciation for what makes a good photo.
Right.
This isn't stuff like they're not like on Facebook, like I'm not sharing the images like this stuff on my Facebook feed and saying like, hey, Auntie Maria, what do you think of this image? I share like photos of dogs and cats and cute stuff and memes on Facebook. So I think if this were just the general audience, the general world probably voting on these, then I might have a little bit more beef with that. But, I think the audience who are looking to vote and participate in this type of, submissions are people who care about this kind of work and have appreciation for it. Maybe they aren't the quote unquote experts who vote and choose, maybe they're not like people with 20, 30 years of experience who vote and perhaps nominate and select the winners for this contest, but there are people probably who have an interest and care and understand what makes a decent photo. So the collective isn't bad, and I think the collective came away with a decent shot here. It's definitely the shot that a collective would choose. That's the one thing I would say about this photo. It is dramatic, it is intense, but is it the best photo compared to everything else? Is it the most meaningful photo? There's a lot of very strong, meaningful photos that are much quieter than this that it was competing against. Right. And I think probably this got the most attention because it is the most attention grabbing of all the photos, because it is the perfect combination of art and also strong, like, social narrative, you know?
Yeah.
If it was just a dude on fire running around, well, that's not hard to replicate, you know? I can go down and douse my buddy with gasoline, light him on fire, and have him run around and get a few shots, you know? And probably get the same or similar shot. It's not that tough. But the fact that it was conjunction with a, you know, protest of a very relevant news story, I think is what makes this shot so striking. And again, it's striking nature. I think we love looking at fire and flames, and it's so much. You know, you look at the other, you know, finalists. There's nothing that's striking in, you know, this degree. You know, all these other shots, you know, if you look on this, are quiet, sort of. Very little is moving in the shot. Sometimes you see dead bodies. You know, maybe a little bit of fire, a little bit of smoke, but these are all, you know, very beautiful, thoughtful storytelling shots, but none of them have nearly the amount of motion and visceral attention as this shot.
Right. So I think you actually just made my argument or my question about the voting of sort of the masses, for lack of a better term, versus the experts. And I'm not sure one or the other, but I basically agree with everything you said, which it is by far the most immediate, evocative, provocative, and the other ones are quieter. We don't know, of course, what are all the hundreds of thousands that we didn't get to see, and you always wonder about that. But I remember when I saw they posted it and they were doing a poll maybe a month ago, I thought that's an interesting thing, and I guess we'll find out in the public discussion over the next month or so how that plays out, if there's a divergence of opinion, if people think that's generally good, and then again, if they're going to repeat it in the future.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, the judges felt it was a great image as well. They gave it first prize in Spot News, so.
Okay, that's a good point, actually. Yeah. So the photo of the year is voted, but the rest of them are judged professionally.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
From what I can tell, I don't know. I'd have to do a little bit more digging into this, but it seems like an interesting concept. I'll be interested to see if they decide to keep it up for next year. Right. I mean, you know, if another photograph of somebody on fire wins next year, then people know how to game the system, and basically that's what you have to do if you want to win World Press Photo. Just get somebody on fire and have them run around at a protest. That's what I'm going to do next time I'm with Zach. I'll be like, Zach, listen, I'm going to douse you in fire. You run around. It'll be great. Trust me. I'll share the winnings with you. No, I'm just kidding.
I don't think this is probably true, but I wonder how much of it, because there's been some controversy in the past about the professionally selected photos of the year in the last few years. And so I wonder if this was their way of sort of keeping themselves out of that potential line of fire.
Yeah, I don't know. All I know is, you know, I hope none of these images were digitally manipulated, you know, because that was the other.
Yeah, that's
the other controversy thing, you know. It's like, hopefully these shots are authentic.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm looking at some of these and I'm thinking, oh, this is some bold color correction and whatnot on some of these. You know, there's some definitely looks like a little bit of HDRing in some of the areas, but you know, overall though, I like the photograph. I have no qualms about it being selected, but again, you know, I do question the overall. Like you said, is it good to have a crowd voting? Did they pick the right choice? Is this the best image of the year? According to the polls, apparently yes, but you know, I don't know. We'll see. Yeah. We'll see what they do next year for sure.
Yeah. So they announced the Pulitzers today. Speaking of which.
Oh, the Pulitzer winners or the Pulitzer nominees?
Yeah. No, the winners today.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm not ready to discuss it. But was there anything? Okay. Is there any particular one you want to bring up?
The one that won for the news photo was that horrific car driving through Charlottesville.
Oh, wow!
Flying in the air.
Wow, Zach is going to be so irritated by that.
Why is that? He's not a fan of the photo, or?
No, because he was also at that protest, and he also shot a very good photograph that was picked up and went viral. You know, again, it's like it's the same location, both shooting protests, both having images that go viral, but obviously his image is that, you know, is so much better in terms of its captivating nature and really, you know, really drew and pushed the sort of narrative with regard to race relations in the United States much further. Not that Zach's didn't, but I mean, in terms of dynamic, reaching the largest amount of people, I think that's what his image. It was just so striking. Zach did a great job with his image, but I could see both images are great. And I think if that image didn't exist, I think Zach's probably would have had a pretty good chance. But Zach shot a great photo that was at the same event, similar time frames, different locations, and that's just sort of the way it is. That's how things kind of pan out sometimes.
Right.
But yeah, glad to see that image get the recognition it deserves. I mean, it's a very strong, striking image that, like I said, pushes the narrative. So, good stuff. We'll have to talk more in more detail about the Pulitzer Prize winners and the non-winners next week. And I'll probably try and get a couple of Pulitzer Prize winners on the show in the future. We were lucky last season, got a couple on the show. I tried to do a mega show with nothing but Pulitzer Prize winners, like get 6 or 7 Pulitzer Prize winners on. But that did not happen. So maybe I'll try again this year. If not, I will try and get the winner on the show to talk about, his work. And I think that will be some interesting conversation.
Yeah.
But I did want to close the show out with our new segment that I'm calling Mailbag until I think of something better. So we got an email from, I'm going to call our show's superfan, our probably only superfan. And I call him that only because he sent us multiple emails. He asked us questions. If you'd like to ask questions to appear on the show, if you'd like to ask questions of our panelists, you can email them to me at info@aroundthelens.com, or you can message me and message the show on Facebook. You can, do all kinds, leave comments, down below on this post. There's a number of ways you can ask questions if you'd like to. But anyways, let me open it up to our question from Mr. Jimmy Mac Gates. Jimmy asks us, basically, if a non-visual journalist, how does a non-visual journalist essentially get his stuff to a wire? What wires would you recommend, or what services would you recommend? So essentially what he's asking is, how do I get started with working with a wire service? So David, why don't you tell us about your story getting with the wire service, and how would you tell somebody to get with a wire service today?
Again, I'm happy to talk about it, but my experience of working with a wire service was very brief, and it was back in a day when there was the skill set issue, which I think I harp on too much. But I was in Southern California at the time, young photographer, freelancing for a very small newspaper chain that had 2 dailies and 19 weeklies, and they used to pay $750 a photo. And after a while, they figured they could hire me full time, and at $750 a photo, they could get all the photos they wanted. And so that's how I got my first newspaper job. And their stuff, of course, was syndicated through Associated Press. That's the connection. And so I met a guy named Reed Saxon then, and Red McClendon, who actually just passed away a couple of years ago. And I started doing some stuff for the wires, but I discovered very quickly that the joke about the wires is you got to get something up first. Doesn't matter how good it is as long as you get something first. And then they work their way sort of down the chain of criteria, first being the most important, and then sort of technically adequate next, and then about 5th or 6th is artistic or somehow really, stylized or something. And that wasn't how I was willing to work. So I had a very, very brief stint working for the wires. If I was starting over, I probably would try to do it by being in a place where there's not anybody else to do it, because that's what the wires want. They want somebody somewhere who can't do something. I mean, you can, you know that as well as I. So maybe the question would be flipped back to you. The wires are the height of hiring a photographer to solve a problem. They need somebody somewhere who has an expertise, who can get imagery out fast, reasonably good first, et cetera, and if there's somebody else there in New York City, they can almost always find somebody else to do it, so they're not going to probably go to you. Where is Jimmy Mack geographically?
I don't know where Jimmy Mack is exactly off the top of my head. I'm sure he's watching right now, so he'll let us know. I would tell Jimmy, and I would tell anybody who's trying to get started is, the first thing you want to do is think local, right? So, like, I look at the region I'm in right now. There's a couple different areas where I could potentially, push my imagery to get featured. There's a local newspaper. There's a few local TV stations. I would start with them. I would cover local stuff, and I would push my content to the local news agencies. Whether or not they purchased it or not is kind of beside the point. The idea is that you want to get your imagery seen by those agencies, by those local agencies first, and have them sort of recognize your work. Become someone that they can rely on for imagery at things. And then that'll hopefully lead to you getting paid for stuff like that. And if your imagery is good enough, it'll get, attention by that newspaper staff or by that agency. And then your imagery will eventually end up on a wire because, like AP, I know that, all the imagery shot at like newspapers gets shared with every other newspaper. So it's going to be on a wire that way. To work directly for a wire, I think you're right. I think you have to be in an underrepresented area. You can't be in a major metropolitan city like Dallas, Jimmy, and competing with thousands of other photographers in your area. I can guarantee you they probably have enough wire photographers in Dallas. But, I do know that wires sometimes do hire new photographers. You can always submit a portfolio. But I think if you get your stuff seen, if you get your stuff seen and visible, if you're putting your stuff out there, you're putting it on social media, if you're giving it to other local news agencies so they can push it, that'll definitely get you recognized. And when it comes time to potentially be hired by a wire, if a wire is looking for full-timer or part-timers, that will definitely be what you need to kind of put yourself above the rest and sort of make yourself stick out. So again, I would say just kind of grow where you're planted, wherever you're at, or like you said, move to an underrepresented area. Where is news being generated that isn't being properly represented? Do I have to go to Africa and, perhaps, shoot over there? That's a sacrifice thing. What do you want to do? How badly do you want it? And do you want to live in areas or be in areas that maybe are unrepresented so that, the wires have to go to you for high quality, content and imagery, so it's a tough thing. Like I said, David, this isn't the back in the day when maybe, there were a lot more opportunities, so.
I met a freelancer recently who basically did exactly what we were just discussing, but what's weird is he's in Worcester, Mass, and I don't know if you can do the mental geography, but it's about an hour west of Boston, maybe a little less, and then an hour north of Providence. And there's colleges and a couple of other things there. And Matt's actually been able to make a pretty good living as a freelancer for the wires and magazines because it's just far enough that they won't send somebody from Boston. They won't send somebody from Providence. And so he's found a niche right there. And so it's not, I hear what you're saying about going far away to Africa, but I'm just wondering if there's some part of Texas, for example, which is just far enough away that people won't send people, but where there's still a lot of activity to do what you just said, get known, shoot a lot of local stuff, start getting in front of people. Yeah.
Yeah, you can make it in a big city with a ton of other competition. You just have to hustle your butt off and basically try to find something people aren't covering or cover something that people are covering in a unique and different way. And I would tell you, Jimmy, if you have stuff, if you shoot an event, submit it to the wires anyways. What's the worst they can do? Not accept it? Right. If you want to get recognized by the wires, just keep on sending them stuff. Just constantly bug them. And that'll do one of two things. Either they'll hate you and ignore you and block you because you're sending them so much stuff, or they'll be like, oh, you know what, this Jimmy guy knows what he's doing. I think I'm going to hire him up for the thing. Maybe consider him. So, maybe bugging and harassing the wires is not the best idea. Perhaps we can get some wire photographers or perhaps some people from the agencies on the show in the future, and we can ask them directly. Sort of what's the best way to sort of get your foot in the door and sort of make yourself known. But, again, there's a lot of different agencies out there. Maybe Getty and AP and these big ones aren't the ones to start with. You start with somebody who maybe an up-and-coming agency or a smaller agency, that is trying to build out that base. And like you said, maybe, there are a lot of wire photographers in Dallas working for AP and Getty, but there's nobody working for Zuma or Nerphoto or one of these other agencies. And you can be their man in that area. Or at least again, when you get a large city, there's a lot of different areas in that city to cover. So there's a lot of different options.
Zoom is actually a very good example because I think they may be the fifth or sixth biggest in terms of dollar volume and images moved a day.
Yeah.
So they would be somebody that Jimmy might look at as the next level down. And then if he gets good enough, he may get, asked to move the next level up.
Right. Yeah. That's my best guess. I've never worked for a wire myself, so I can't really talk to that. I'm just kind of guessing. So good luck to you. Hope that helped out, and let us know how you do. And like I said, we'll try and maybe get some people associated with these agencies in the future and give you a better answer. All right, David. Well, we're nearing the end of our show. Is there anything you would like to push, promote, or highlight besides yourself, or in
Just
addition
send
to yourself?
everybody who wants to know more. It's davidhwells.com, and that's both my still site, my video site, and the blog, which has a lot of free lessons, podcasts, all these movies I've made over the years. It's all at davidhwells.com.
Awesome, awesome. And of course, please, by all means, head over to aroundthelens.com for all your Around the Lens needs. Go buy some merch. Go donate to our Patreon. Support the show. Or just watch the show and tell a friend. Tell a friend about the show. That's all I ask.
Yes.
Increase our subscriber numbers. Anyways, though, thank you again so much, David, for taking time to be on the show. Because if you weren't here, I'd be talking by myself. It would be me and Jimmy, the Jimmy and Dave show, right, Jimmy? Anyways, thanks so much, David, for your time. I am David J. Murphy. For me, myself, and I, this has been Around the Lens, episode 120. And we are out!